This edition of MacVoices is supported by Take Control Books, the answers you need now from leading experts. Visit TakeControlBooks.com to find out what you can learn. And by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter for MacVoices viewers and listeners. Get the inside scoop on all the MacVoices news by visiting MacVoices.com/newsletter to subscribe. Welcome to MacVoices. This is a Talk to the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we're going to go in a little bit different direction this time around. I'm happy to welcome for the first time to MacVoices, Wendy Cherwinski. Wendy, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, Wendy, you may recognize her last name. Her husband, Wally, is one of the masterminds and the editing genius behind some of the Macworld All-Star Band videos you can find on YouTube. But Wendy's in a whole different game, and I'm going to let her explain what her background is and her connections, and then we'll talk about our subject. Because, Wendy, I'd love to give you a really terrific introduction, but I know I won't do you justice. So I know speechwriter seems to be kind of a simple term for, I think, everything that you do.
Yes, I call myself the specialist in the spoken word. So I write speeches and presentations, and I teach people how to write speeches and presentations, and I coach speakers as well. So that's the main focus. I do some other writing. I do some copywriting, and of course I also write on tech. Once a month, I write for Screencasts Online magazine because I have a real interest in Mac and iOS technology.
So when you say you teach speaking and presentations, are we talking about the inevitable keynote PowerPoint, or is it more, it's primarily from the verbal side, is it not?
Yeah, mostly how to put together your presentations, how to put together speeches, which is when someone gets up and basically speaks without any audio-visual support, and then how to put together presentations. So you might have, a slideshow. And so I don't get into the nuts and bolts of how to put together a keynote presentation, but I tell people what the communications principles are and how to bring their message together with their visuals, so it makes a really good impact.
So right about now, you're probably wondering, folks, what Wendy's doing here if she's a speechwriter. But Wendy just gave a webinar, that I thought the premise was fascinating, and that is how social media in today's world is affecting speaking. I don't know about you, but I go to a lot of speeches and a lot of presentations, some of which are backed with AV, and that's a whole nother discussion, and some which are just completely off the cuff. And I know the ones that resonate with me, and unfortunately they seem to be decreasing in number. It seems like there are a lot of people that are getting up there. They're not either really prepared, don't know what they want to say, or don't know how to say it. And I don't know if that's a symptom of social media or not. So I thought we'd have Wendy talk a little bit to us about just what is happening with spoken word in our world and how social media is impacting it, because it's something we all participate in.
Sure.
So, Wendy, take it away. I'll let you kind of jump in where you want to with that kind of introduction.
Okay, well, I'll talk about some of the things that I covered on the webinar. And basically, I said social media is having a big effect on the way we communicate. People have stampeded to join up with Facebook and Twitter and use social media tools. And we're seeing what's happening to a lot of traditional media, newspapers closing, television stations slashing their staff, etc., because of they're finding it hard to compete in this world with social media. So what does it mean to speakers, etc.? Well, I'm finding that the way people want to communicate through social media is having an effect on speeches. First of all, the way we communicate has changed, but also people's expectations of communications have changed. So my message to my fellow speechwriters was basically get with the program here. Because I think you hit upon it when you said, I got a feeling you find some speeches just maybe dull and boring, disorganized, not a lot of point to them. And I think people have to sharpen things up because expectations have changed due to social media. And I gave 3 examples of how our expectations have changed. Number one, social media is really democratic. Everyone can join the party. You can sign up for Twitter or Facebook or get yourself, a YouTube channel or whatever. There aren't big barriers to doing that. You don't have to buy a printing press. You don't have to get a broadcast license. So everyone can get in and participate. So that was one. Secondly, communications is flatter. I'm sure you found it. You have more access now to people. I've used Twitter, for instance, to talk to people who I know I never would have reached them any other way. There's a big name American consultant who I admire, and I've had little conversations with him on Twitter. And normally I would never get near somebody like that. And the third way it's changed is social media promotes engagement. And I'm saying speeches and presentations have got to be really engaging as well. For instance, on social media, you can like something, you can retweet something, you can comment on something and maybe even get an answer back from people. So what I'm saying is speeches and presentations have got to be more interactive too. And there's lots of ways to make them interactive, but sometimes people just have this, very conventional idea of what a speech or presentation should be like. And I guess my other message was creativity is really important in this day and age. We're now in the attention age. Attention has become a commodity. It used to be we were in the information age. And now, so if you want that attention, you have to be creative. And somebody came up with something that I thought was really interesting. They had a list of the workplace attributes that were important for workers in 2015. And it was a list of 10 attributes, and the last one on the list was creativity. Then they've redone the list for 2020, and creativity is now number 3 on the list. So it's really gained position. And when you think of it, a lot of jobs that I remember from the 70s and 80s don't even exist anymore. The creative ones are the ones that are going to be valued in the future.
There's so many things you said in the description for the webinar and also that you just said there that resonate with me on so many levels. There's the level of the audience that I try to reach and that I engage with to varying degrees. There's the guy that is wearing the tie and works in an office during the day, the businessman. And I find so many of these things. I think your second point was more engaging. And I believe on the blog description, the webinar description, you were saying that it has to be a little less, talk at people and talk to people, have more of a conversation.
Yes.
And I think that's just such an incredibly important point because that's what people expect. And now we have the tools that let you have those conversations easily, where before you really didn't necessarily have that option.
That's right. And there used to be more deference for authority. So people would sit there and they'd be happy to be lectured at. They will not tolerate that anymore. They want a conversation. They want to be seen as a peer. As I said, social media has sort of flattened communications, and that's a carryover. You want to have a conversation as a peer.
That's fascinating. So when we go to a lecture or to a presentation or something, how does that affect how the presenter feels? I mean, he or she go in feeling like they're a little more of the expert? And yet, because if you're talking to peers, I think you approach it a little bit differently than if you feel like you're talking to an audience that you need to enlighten, inform, educate.
Yeah, it might be a bit of an overgeneralization, but generally they want a conversation as if you're a friendly neighbor who has some expertise, and you're curious about this expertise or issue that they know a lot about. So you want to have a conversation with them about it in that regard. And I use Abraham Lincoln as an example. I mean, Abraham Lincoln lived 150 years ago or whatever, but he was very famous for having said, when I sit down to write a speech, I spend 2/3 of my time thinking about what people want to hear, and 1/3 of my time thinking about what I want to say. So he really had this sense of, I have to work in a framework of what their interests and concerns are, and then I can have a conversation with them and get my message in there somehow. And he was very successful. His speeches are still in print all these years later.
Wendy, how the social media part, and do you think that has been the real driving force? I mean, it obviously is in some parts of this for this discussion, but is it just that we're all doing everything so much faster that we just don't have time for the long bellicose speeches of yesteryear? Or is it the fact that we're communicating in 148 characters or in blog posts and all that has gotten us to this point?
Yeah. Well, certainly everything has sped up, and people have a little less patience than they used to. And a good measure of that is the soundbite. Do you know the soundbite back in the 60s was something like 43 seconds long? And now it's less than 8 seconds long, the average soundbite. And apparently, I read that a goldfish has an attention span of 8 seconds. So in some cases, people have a shorter attention span than a goldfish now.
That's a little frightening. Yeah. I think I know some of those people.
But another point that I covered in the webinar is the fact that there's a real pressure on thought leaders, etc. Now, when something happens, get out there, say something on Twitter or Facebook or have a blog post, but get out there right away. So there's a little less emphasis on taking the time to really think things through and build arguments and put together a speech. So my advice is think fast and slow. Sure, you may have to get the word out right away through social media, but that alone, you should go back. The speech is still a really, really useful tool for getting your message across and at a greater level of depth, I would say, and allows you to do a little more analysis as well. And then you can repurpose a speech or a presentation and you can integrate social media into it, and you can repurpose what you said in a speech or presentation and broadcast it again through social media.
Do you think that, in your opinion, do you feel like there is an absolute top end where you should not speak for anything beyond a certain period of time? I mean, it sounds like we have sort of 8 seconds as the bottom. And I know the top has to be shorter than it used to be, but is there a place where you think that you've hit diminishing returns and should just sit down and shut up?
Yes. And I think the cutoff point is 20 minutes. It doesn't matter how fascinating your subject or how much expertise you have in it. Nobody's listening after 20 minutes. And if you notice TED Talks, I think the longest TED Talks are 18 minutes. And a lot of TED Talks now are going down to 5 minutes. And I've watched a lot of them. And quite frankly, if you're really well organized, you can say a lot in 5 minutes. But certainly people's patience, people's tolerance for long, long speeches are over.
Okay, so I'm going to take this a little personally as a podcaster, and I know the kind of shows I produce. I typically shoot for 35 to 45 minutes, under the theory that, as I recall, when I was in college, that's one of the reasons they made classes that long, because that was about the length of the attention span. So you're saying the attention span has probably been halved?
Uh, well, a speech or presentation, you usually have people sitting in chairs looking forward in an auditorium or something. And I'd say in those situations, people they get to the end of their rope a little faster than if you're listening to a podcast when you're driving in a car. You're quite happy to listen for 35 minutes under those circumstances. But yeah, I know 20-minute speeches are, that seems to be the end of people's uh, ability to pay attention to one person speaking at them all the time. You also have a little more opportunity. You can bring in music. You can do a lot of things to change things up in a podcast. So I'm not sure if I can compare a speech to a podcast exactly.
And I definitely don't want to generalize here, because I realize that there are a lot of different kinds of media. You might compare it to a white paper versus a blog post. I mean, nobody's going to read 25 pages of a blog post, but they might feel the need to read, or at least have access to, that much in a white paper. So it is, I'm with you. I like things a lot more concise, but there are times that I want a little more depth, and that's,
Yes.
I guess, I miss some of that in journalism, where we don't seem to have the deep information articles that we used to have. Everything is kind of sound bites, or text sound bites, or whatever you want to call that.
Yes. So if all your communications are just in these short forms, I think you will have lost something for sure.
How about tips for communicating properly on social media? When I say properly, I guess effectively might be a better choice of words. Anything that any regular mistakes that you see people making all the time, and that you just shake your head and shudder?
Well, Twitter has made it really hard to make any mistakes because you only have 140 characters to work with. That helps. It helps to have some limitations like that, I would say. Yeah, I find I look at Facebook every day, and I find when I see 3 or 4 paragraphs there, I think, oh, I can't last for 3 or 4 paragraphs, So maybe people make posts too long in some instances. Gee, I haven't offered much advice on that. I'll tell you the mistake people make in speeches and presentations that I notice is they write them as if somebody's going to read the words off the page when someone's actually going to speak them. So I tell people, write out loud, literally. Say out loud what you want to write down, and then write it down. And so write the way people talk, as opposed to the way people write on paper. And there are differences.
Yeah, there are big differences. We all know the trick of proofreading anything you write, that you read it out loud and you'll find the mistakes faster. But this takes that to a little bit different level, I think.
That's the way you make things conversational. And I say, one thing you can do is listen to radio documentaries. I don't know if you have lots of opportunities in the States to do that. The CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, has lots of shows that have these radio documentaries, and they're written for the voice. And so you get used to, you begin to see the tricks to write for the voice that way, and then imported into speech writing and writing your presentation scripts.
I do listen to some things that CBC does, and I am kind of struck at times by the different style of communication, but I never really sat down and thought about, okay, this is what characterizes that style versus, say, something from the United States or something from the UK. That's a very interesting point. Do you think that does that, I guess, yeah, you already said it. It makes it more effective. Does it make it? Is that distinctly Canadian, or is it? Am I just being a bit of a self-centered American?
Oh no, it's not distinctly Canadian. I think it's a feature of the radio documentary form. And I know you have National Public Radio, so you probably have some on there. And of course, podcasts. Many podcasts are basically documentary in form as well. So some of them that are really written for the voice, they sound very spontaneous, and I guess some podcasters too, they're working spontaneously. So that's what you want to bring into your speech, is that conversational tone of voice that people in radio documentaries and podcasts achieve.
That's very wise, I think, because there are shows, entire shows that are scripted. That's all they are, and it makes me a little crazy because you absolutely can tell that someone is just reading a script as opposed to attempting to be conversational. Mm-hmm. Now, I do a script for certain parts of some of the shows, and I try to do exactly what you said. I try to be conversational. Sometimes I'm a little more successful than others, but it's quite a difference in working from a script versus working live and working that conversational side.
Yes, and some people, they just can't be put in the position of speaking off the cuff. If they've got something very important to say and they really want to get it across in a certain way, but they should still work at making that conversational. And it is a skill. It's a skill you get better at with practice.
This may be a little bit outside your wheelhouse, but I'll go there anyway, because you talk primarily about speech and all. But how would you advise business people when they're trying to communicate with their customers at this point? Because they don't get a chance to stand up in front of their customers most of the time and make a speech. They're either making a sales call, they're making a sales pitch, or they're trying to communicate from a service perspective after the sale has been made. Did the same rules apply there?
I think so. I think the important thing is to basically have a little strategy in place. What are your important messages? What is really important to get across to people? And then adjust your message to their style, basically. Figure out how they like to be communicated with and try your best to communicate your message, but know what the messages are that you want to get across, and then adjust the style to suit the customer.
So when you say style, are you referring to the channel, if you will, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, telephone, or are you talking?
Yes.
Okay, that's what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Okay, that feels like good advice, and it seems like that we're seeing a lot. We're not seeing that happen yet. It's fascinating that it's happened in the news media, and it's happening now. You're talking about how speech writers and speech givers need to adjust, and the business people are still trying to figure it out and catch up.
Yes, and the important thing is to realize too, I think, is the audience is in the driver's seat, because people, and a lot of business people, I think, are well aware of this. People are driven by their own interests. And so it's important then to frame what you want to talk to them about in terms of their own interest, why they should see a benefit or an advantage for themselves in what you're basically selling. So you have to always come at it from the customer's point of view, from the audience point of view.
The customer's always right?
Well, they're always working from their own self-interest or their own interests. If it isn't of interest to them, they don't care. So if you want them to care, you have to sort of frame what you're talking about in terms of what would be of interest to them. Back to Abraham Lincoln.
This is fascinating. I just had a conversation earlier today, not about this, but kind of in that general realm, that an organization that I'm dealing with, they want to talk about what they want to talk about, not what we want to talk about, and trying to bridge that divide and make them understand that, okay, what you're saying, you may think that it's really, really important, and perhaps it is, but it's not what's on my agenda right now that I need to get addressed.
I see. Well, somehow you're going to have to bridge that by bringing your interest together with the other group's interest. You've got to find that common ground. What's the common ground?
Wendy, obviously, this is what you do for a living, but what kind of sparked these observations and made you want to do the webinar?
A couple of things. It was World Speech Day yesterday, and which was the brainchild of a British speechwriter. And so I thought, well, I will observe World Speech Day. And so I thought, what's a topic that would be of interest? And recently I've had some discussions with another speechwriter, and he keeps telling me about organizations where they don't care about speeches anymore. Their focus is totally on social media. And so I thought, I better take a look at this and see what's the effect of social media on speeches, and discovered there wasn't a lot of material out there when I went looking for it, but it looked like an interesting topic, and I really enjoyed researching it. And I got a good response from the people who attended the webinar too, so I think I hit on something with it.
I think you definitely did, and again, from so many angles. At this point, is it safe to say that social media, in some form or another, whether it's Twitter and Facebook or something that comes next, is it here to stay, or is it just a flash in the pan?
Oh, good question. I think it's here to stay, but I think it's changing rapidly, more rapidly than before. But I started my career as a newspaper reporter, and we were in competition with the local radio station, and every time they beat us to a story, we would basically console ourselves by saying radio is not here to stay. Because that's what people said when radio first appeared, is that it would not last. Well, it has lasted, and it seems like every time you start a new media, the old ones stick around in one form or another.
And they sometimes get put to different uses.
Yes.
I think this is fascinating. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in 10 or 15 years to television, when with broadcast television, as opposed to the on-demand stuff that we have now. You have on-demand, from anywhere on your phones or on your iPads or on your desktop, as opposed to having to go and sit down in front of a big screen in your living room and do it on their terms. And there's still that industry still seems to be fighting that. They're not engaging in the conversation that you and I are talking about.
Right. Although I'm enjoying TV more than ever. Like, I think the format has changed. The series that come out that are maybe 13 episodes, and then you wait another year to see the next 13 episodes. And the fact that through Netflix you can binge on the 13 episodes if you want to. So it has changed, and it's still finding an audience in that regard.
Yeah, and sometimes our nose is too close to the picture. We can't really see those changes. You don't really realize them until somebody points them out, just like you did. That, yeah. Oh yeah, we didn't have that, or we didn't used to have that. Now we've got that, and so yeah, it means that there's a lot more great content out there. There's so much content out there.
Yes,
and that presents its own set of problems. So, Wendy, this has been fascinating. I should have asked this at the beginning, and I want to make sure we get into it. But without revealing anything you shouldn't, can you give us an idea of some of the clients you've had that you've written speeches for?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the Governor General of Canada, I wrote. That's the Queen's representative in Canada. I wrote for. I've written for many ministers of the Crown. That's cabinet ministers. And for some people in industry, in the printing industry, in the aeronautical industry, in defense procurement industries. And so I've been in business for 25 years, so I've covered the waterfront, I think, in terms of clients.
Well, I wanted to make sure I got that in there, especially because it's not just politicians, and everything. And I'm curious. And don't give us any names, and don't even narrow it down, but just give us an idea. Do they listen to you when you give them advice, or do they just kind of plow on with what they want to say and just tell you to make the words for them?
Well, first of all, I'm not a partisan speechwriter. They're always in elected office. And, it's everything from they invite you in, they sit down and have a wonderful conversation, and they're so passionate about what they want to talk about. And it's just really great to meet them, to having one of their assistants tell you, well, basically, he wants to talk about this or that or the other thing. Send us a draft. So you get and everything in between.
Surprise.
In fact, that's a real skill, learning to write for people you don't get to meet. And you come across that often. And that's one of the big questions I get asked in my speech writing workshops. How do I write for a boss who can't make time to meet with me? So I've come up with lots of tactics over the years.
I would never have thought about it, asking someone to write a speech for me that I didn't sit down and at least communicate with.
It happens.
That's fascinating. Wow. We got to have you back and talk more about some of this stuff. This is fascinating. But let's see. Judging by I think we've about run out of time based on your recommendations of about 20 to 20. Wendy, where can folks find you if they would like to learn more or maybe even retain your services?
Sure. I have a website. It's echeloncom.ca. So www.echeloncom.ca. My company is called Echelon Communications. ECHELON is how it's. So ECHELONCOMM.ca.
And I believe you're on Twitter as well?
I'm on Twitter at Wendy Cherwinski.
Great. And of course, I'll have links in the show notes to everything, folks, so you can find Wendy and maybe pick her brain if you need to and learn a little bit from her. I feel like I have already, and I'm looking forward to learning more.
And I have a blog and an e-newsletter called Pen and Podium, so people can subscribe to my monthly e-newsletter, and I always give 3 practical tips on how to use anything I talk about, and my blog is on my website.
Great. And again, I'll make sure there are links in the show notes to everything. Thank you. I'm glad I didn't miss the blog or the newsletter. Wendy, it's a real pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing you and Wally at MacStock in Chicago and having you back here on MacVoices to maybe share a little more information and make us all better communicators.
Oh, my pleasure. Would love to. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Folks, I'm going to start trying to follow some of Wendy's advice. Maybe you can too, and maybe it will benefit us all. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.